our little one. I can't believe it. I love you so much. I love you too. We're going to be a family.
Hello, my loves. Come here. Closer. Yes, like that. Tonight I'm telling you a slow burn, Sapphic love story about a woman who signed a contract to carry a billionaire's baby and fell in love with the wrong half of that marriage. 9 months. That's what she agreed to. 9 months. And a room across the hall. And a woman who noticed everything. She should have read Clause 11. She should have asked why the wife came to every appointment. She should have asked a lot of things, sweetheart. But you already know why she didn't. Because someone finally looked at her. Now tell me something before we start. Where are you listening from tonight? Your city, your country, leave it in the comments. I read every single one. I do. I like knowing where you are while I'm talking to you. So get comfortable, sweetheart. Let's rewind. Her office at midnight, no lights on. Just the city, 60 floors down, pretending to be stars. She didn't turn around when I came in. You're carrying a child for my husband. Yes. The word came out steady. My hands didn't. I pressed them flat against my thighs so she wouldn't see. She turned, slowly, the way weather turns. Then explain to me, Mira, why I'm the one who can't sleep unless I know which room you're in. And there it was. My name. In her mouth. In the dark. Not the surrogate. Not Miss Solano. Not the arrangement. Not the contract. Not the 9 months I'd signed away like a woman signing away a house she'd never live in. Mira, my heart didn't race. It stopped. It just stopped. Like it was waiting for permission. And I remember thinking, this is the moment. This is the exact second I stopped being able to lie to myself. Wait, I am getting way ahead of myself. The elevator to the 60th floor didn't make noise. That was the first thing I noticed. Elevators in my life rattled. They groaned. They had inspection certificates from 3 years ago taped crooked behind scratched plastic. This one just sighed. A soft, mechanical sigh. Like even the building was too rich to be tired. I'd worn my best blouse. It had cost $19 4 years ago, and I'd ironed it twice that morning, and the second the doors opened, I understood it didn't matter. Nothing I owned was ever going to matter in a place like this. The lobby was marble. All of it. I pressed my palm flat against the reception counter while I gave my name, and the cold went straight through my skin like a diagnosis. Like the building was taking my temperature and finding me insufficient. Miss Solano, she's expecting you. She, not they. Not Mr. and Mrs. Cade. Just she. I should have paid attention to that. I didn't. I was too busy trying to remember how to breathe like a person who belonged in an elevator that didn't rattle. The office at the end of the hall had glass walls, and behind them, a woman stood with her back to me, looking out at the city like it owed her money. Vesper Lin. I'd looked her up, obviously. Everyone had a picture of her, the biotech heiress, the woman who bought hospitals the way other people bought groceries. In every photo, she wore the same expression. Not cold, exactly. Finished. Like a sentence with no room left for questions. Sit, she said, without turning around. Not a request. Not an invitation. A placement. I sat. The room smelled like cedar and cold metal, and somewhere behind the walls, air moved through vents with a hum so smooth it must have cost more than my car. There was a glass table between us, no papers on it, just one folder, squared perfectly to the table's edge, like it had been placed with a level. She turned around, and my heart did this small, stupid, traitorous thing. It lurched. Not because she was beautiful, although she was, in the way a winter is beautiful. It lurched because she was already looking at me, not at my blouse, not at my hands, at me, like she'd started reading before I'd even sat down. You're a dialysis technician. Yes, 7 years. Night shifts, mostly. You requested them. A pause. Why? They pay differently, I said. They pay $1 more an hour. She sat, unhurried. That's not why. My breath caught somewhere behind my ribs. Because she was right, and because she knew she was right, and because nobody, not my supervisor, not my mother's care coordinator, not one single person in 7 years had ever asked the question twice. Nights are quieter, I said. The patients sleep. When they're asleep, they're not scared. Something moved through her face. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't warmth. It was assessment. Like I'd passed a test she hadn't told me she was giving. "The compensation," she said, "is in the folder. The terms are non-negotiable. The confidentiality is absolute." Each sentence dropped like a stone into still water. "Read it here. You take nothing out of this room but your answer." I opened the folder. I read the number. And I had to put my hand flat on my thigh, under the table, because it had started to tremble and I would not let her see that. The number was 4 years of my life. The number was my mother's facility bill. Paid, gone, done. The number was a door swinging open in a hallway I'd stopped believing had doors. "Take your time," she said. She stood and crossed to the window, giving me her back again, and I understood that too. She was letting me fall apart in private. Or she was showing me she didn't need to watch to know what I'd decide. With a woman like her, both things could be true at once. The way a storm can be moving toward you and away from someone else at the same time a storm choosing where to land. Somewhere in that long silence my eyes wandered. I couldn't help it. There was a credenza against the far wall, and on it, a tray someone had brought in and forgotten pastries. Glossy, absurd, the kind of food that exists mostly to be photographed. I hadn't eaten since the night before. I'd told myself I wasn't hungry. My stomach, quietly, at that exact moment, told her I was a liar. I looked away fast. She hadn't turned around. She couldn't have seen. I went back to the contract and read clause after clause and understood maybe half, and my pulse kept tapping at the side of my throat like a visitor who wouldn't leave. 20 minutes later, the door opened. An assistant came in without a word, set a small white plate at my elbow, and left. On the plate, the pastry. Not a pastry. The one. The exact one my eyes had landed on almond, with the dark seam of chocolate down the center lifted off that tray across the room and delivered to me like a verdict. I stared at it. And my whole body went cold, then hot, then cold again, because I understood the way you understand a door clicking shut behind you that it wasn't food. It wasn't hospitality. It was a message. She had been standing at that window with her back to me, and she had still seen where my eyes went. She saw everything. She had probably seen the trembling hand, too, and the ironed twice blouse, and every single thing I thought I'd hidden. It wasn't kindness. It wasn't courtesy. It was a demonstration. I looked up. She had turned from the window at last, and she was watching me with those finished, wintered eyes, waiting to see what I'd do with what I now knew. "You didn't ask if I was hungry," I said. "No," she said. I watched. The legal suite was 2 floors down, and the elevator sighed the whole way, and I spent those 11 seconds trying to remember every word my brother-in-law had ever said about contracts. Read everything, question everything, sign nothing you don't understand. Then the doors opened, and Adrian Cade was already walking toward me with his hand out, and every careful thing in my head scattered like birds. "Mira, there she is. There she is." Like I was someone people waited for. He was handsome in the easy, sunlit way that magazines like the kind of man who has never once wondered whether he belonged in a room. His handshake was warm. His smile was warm. His cologne was bright citrus, cheerful and clean, and it was completely wrong in that room, the way a beach ball is wrong at a funeral. Everything else on that floor was cedar and glass and silence, and here was this man smelling like a summer vacation. "Vesper says you're perfect," he said. And Vesper never says that. About anything. I once watched her return a car. I laughed. I didn't mean to. It just came out, and he looked delighted, like making me laugh had been on his to-do list. Behind him, at the head of the table, Vesper didn't laugh. She was seated with her hands folded, and she was watching us the way you watch weather through glass. Present. Removed. Taking readings. "Sit. Sit," Adrian said, pulling out my chair himself. "This part's painless, I promise. Lawyers make everything sound like a hostage situation, but really it's just..." He waved a hand at the document waiting in front of my seat. Housekeeping. The contract was thick. That was the first thing my fingers learned. The paper was heavy stock, dense and soft, almost like fabric, and it made the pages of my life, leases, medical forms, payment plans, feel like tissue in comparison. Rich people's paper. Even their fine print had weight. A lawyer at the end of the table clicked her pen. Once. Twice. The sound was tiny, and it filled the whole room, because nothing else in that room made noise at all. I started at page 1. Oh, you don't have to. Adrian leaned in, friendly, and laid his hand flat across the page, not grabbing, not forceful, just resting there, casual as a Sunday. The first 10 pages are boilerplate. Definitions, jurisdictions, boring parts. Trust me, I've signed 100 of these. His hand stayed on the page. And I want to tell you it was nothing. Because he meant nothing by it, I knew that, even then. He was being kind. He was trying to spare me. But my chest went tight anyway, because a man's hand on the words I was about to sign was still a man's hand on the words I was about to sign, and it didn't matter how nice the man was. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was a habit, the habit of a person who had never needed to read anything, deciding what I needed to read. I read everything, I said, quietly. It's a rule I have. For 1 second, the room held its breath. Then Adrian laughed a real laugh, big and easy, and lifted his hand off the page like it had never been there. See? Perfect, he said, to Vesper this time. You were right. Vesper said nothing. But when I glanced up, her eyes were already on me, and there was something new in them. Not approval, exactly. Approval wrapped in pressure, like a hand you're glad to have on your shoulder even as it steers you. So I read, page after heavy page, pen clicking somewhere at the edge of the world, citrus and cedar fighting quietly in the air, compensation, confidentiality, medical protocols. My eyes were starting to blur when I reached it. Clause 11. Residential provision. For the duration of the term, the carrier shall reside on-site at the primary residence, in quarters designated by the client, for purposes of continuous medical monitoring and welfare. I read it twice, 3 times. I'd live with you, I said. With us? Adrian said cheerfully. The East Suite. It has better light than our room, honestly. Vesper insisted on that floor specifically. It's a medical pregnancy, Vesper said. Flat. Final. 5 words, placed on the table like the folder had been placed on the glass squared, aligned. No room underneath to slide anything else. Monitoring requires proximity. That was all. She didn't sell it. She didn't soften it. She never over-explained anything I would learn, because explanations are what people give when they expect to be argued with. My heart was doing something complicated. 9 months in a stranger's house. 9 months. 11 steps from people whose lives cost more than my whole neighborhood. Every instinct I had was standing up and pointing at the door. And underneath the instincts, quieter, worse. 4 years of debt, gone. My mother, safe. The door in the hallway, open. I need a minute, I said. Water. Sorry. Down the hall, on the left, Adrian said, already standing to get it for me. But I was faster. I was up. I was out. Because I needed 30 seconds where nobody was watching my face. The hallway was empty and cold and blessedly quiet. I found the water. I drank it. I breathed. And on my way back, 10 feet from the conference room, the door swung nearly shut ahead of me, someone's exit, a draft. I'll never know. And through the closing gap I heard Adrian's voice, lowered, warm, meant for one person. She's perfect, Vez. She's exactly what you asked for. The door clicked closed. I stood in that hallway with an empty glass in my hand and the cold coming up through the floor, and the sentence just hung there, replaying, snagging on one word like fabric on a nail. What you asked for. Not we. Not us. Not the 2 of them. The married couple. The parents-to-be. The matching set on the magazine covers. You. I told myself it meant nothing. Married people talk like that. He was probably just being generous, giving her the credit, the way easy men do. I went back in. I sat down. I picked up the pen, and the paper took my signature like it had been waiting for it. Soft as fabric, heavy as a door. 9 months. That's what I signed. The contract said 9 months. It didn't say anything about after. I moved in on a Tuesday, because Tuesdays are when unremarkable things happen, and I needed this to feel unremarkable. It did not cooperate. A car came for me. A driver named Tomas carried both of my bags, both, plural, the entire inventory of my life fitting into 2 bags a stranger could lift at once, and the private elevator to the penthouse floor required a keycard, and the keycard had my name on it already, printed, laminated. Mira Solano, like I was staff and family and inmate all at the same time, and nobody had decided which. The elevator sighed its soft mechanical sigh, and the doors opened onto the 40th floor, and I stepped into the smell of cedar. It was in the walls. I understood that within a day it wasn't a candle. It wasn't a spray. It was the building itself. Some architect's decision made years ago, so that the air of that whole floor carried her in it. Cedar and something cooler underneath. I'd smelled it first in her office and thought it was hers. It just turned out that everything on that floor was hers, including, now, in a way I'd signed for. Me. East Suite. Tomas said, and left me at the door, and was gone before I could figure out whether you tip a man in a house like that. The suite was bigger than my apartment. Not a little bigger. Insultingly bigger. There was a bed you could get lost in, and a bathroom with 2 sinks, 2 for 1 person, as if even my reflection deserved an upgrade, and windows from the floor to the ceiling with the whole city laid out below like something that had surrendered. Took my shoes off at the door. Habit. My mother's daughter to the end. And the marble was so cold through my socks that I actually gasped this small, embarrassing sound in the empty room. Beautiful, gleaming, veined like frozen smoke, and cold as a January sidewalk. Rich people, I decided, standing there with my toes curling, must simply never touch their own floors. I counted the steps from my door to hers that first evening. I told myself I wasn't doing it. I did it anyway. 11. 11 steps of hallway between my door and the door of Vesper Lin's bedroom. And somewhere off that hallway, the room she shared with Adrian or didn't, because I'd already noticed, the way you notice things you have no business noticing, that his study was on the far side of the penthouse and had a couch in it with a folded blanket on the arm, a blanket that had been used and refolded. Used and refolded. I noticed. I filed it away. I hated myself a little for the filing. I wanted, that first night, exactly one thing: to be invisible. To unpack quietly, eat something small, and shrink to a manageable size before anyone looked at me again. Instead, at 7, there was a knock. She didn't wait for me to answer it all the way. The door opened as I opened it, and Vesper Lin stood in my doorway in a gray sweater. A sweater, not armor, and my brain stalled on it, because it was like seeing winter wear socks. Settling in, she said. Not quite a question. Nothing she said was ever quite a question. Trying. The room is too much. It's the correct room. She stepped past me, one slow survey of the suite, and stopped at the window, where the latch had been left open by whoever cleaned. Outside, the wind had picked up. The city sounded far away and expensive. You'll want this closed at night, she said. The draft comes off the water. And she reached past me to shut it. I should have stepped back. There was room. There was a whole insulting acreage of room, but I didn't move fast enough. Or I didn't move at all, and her forearm brushed my shoulder as the latch clicked down wool, warm, the ghost weight of her. And then the latch was closed and her arm was still there. 1 second. 2. It wasn't an accident anymore at 2. Accidents end. This stayed. Light as breath, deliberate as a signature. And my pulse went off like something dropped down a stairwell, loud, tumbling, impossible to call back. 3. Then she straightened, unhurried, as if time belonged to her and she was merely lending me some of it, and crossed to the little kitchenette like nothing had happened. Because to her, maybe, nothing had. That was the thing about Vesper Lin that was going to ruin me, and I already knew it standing there with my shoulder burning. I couldn't tell the difference between what she meant and what she simply allowed. You haven't eaten, she said, opening a cupboard. Not asking, reporting. I was going to. There's a kitchen stocked down the hall. Use it. Clause 11 isn't decorative. She said it the way other people say take care of yourself, which is to say, she would never say take care of yourself. She issued welfare like a directive, approval wrapped in pressure, care with the serial numbers filed off. And then she moved one more cupboard door, checking her staff's work, and I saw it. On the second shelf, a yellow box with red lettering, Manzanilla con miel. Chamomile with honey, but not any chamomile, not the hotel lobby kind. The specific cheap grocery brand box with the specific dented-looking sunflower on the front that my mother has bought since before I was born, that I have bought for her every month since she stopped being able to, that sits on the little shelf in her facility room next to her glasses. That tea. That exact tea. Here, on the 40th floor, in a cupboard that cost more than my rent, waiting for me like it had been told I was coming. My breath caught. My eyes went hot, fast and without permission, and I turned my face toward the window because I would not cry over tea in front of this woman on the first night. "The tea," I managed. "How did you—" "I read your file," she said. She was already at the door. She said it the way she said everything smooth, closed, a drawer sliding shut. And I stood there in my socks on that frozen marble, holding the counter's edge, thinking the one thing I couldn't say out loud, the thing that kept me awake long after her 11 steps had carried her away down the hall. It wasn't in my file. The clinic didn't look like a clinic. That was the first wrong thing. Ray Reproductive occupied the top floor of a building with a doorman, and the waiting room had orchids in it, real ones, and the chairs were leather, and there was no television bolted to any wall playing daytime, nothing at half volume. I had spent 7 years of my life in medical buildings. I knew their smells, their sounds, their particular fluorescent despair. This place had been designed by someone who wanted you to forget medicine was happening. But underneath the orchids, it was still there. Antiseptic lemon, that sharp citrus over bleach smell that no amount of money ever fully buries, because it can't be buried. It's the smell of things being made clean that were not clean. I clocked it the second the elevator opened, and something in my shoulders came down half an inch. Whatever else this place was, it was still my country. I spoke the language. Vesper came with me. Of course she came with me. Clause 11 had cousins, apparently, unwritten ones. And one of them was that Vesper Lin attended everything. She sat beside me in the orchid room in a coat the color of wet slate, and read nothing, looked at nothing, waited the way a knife waits in a drawer. Adrian did not come. Board meeting. He'd said that morning, kissing the air near Vesper's cheek, squeezing my shoulder like a coach. First of many, Mira. Take notes for me. The nurse called my name. Vesper stood when I stood. And the doctor was already in the exam room when we entered, reading a chart she didn't need to read, and I knew who she was before she turned around, because the whole room had rearranged itself around her the way rooms did around Vesper. Some people are furniture. Some people are weather. Miss Solano. She turned. 50, maybe. Silver threaded through dark hair, deliberately unhidden. A smile that arrived a half-second late, like it had been sent for. Imogen Ray. This is my clinic. Then her eyes went past me. Vesper. One word. No title. No surname. And the temperature of the room dropped through the floor, because Vesper said nothing at all, and I had been living 11 steps from her long enough now to know that Vesper Lin's silences came in different weights, and this one was heavy enough to bend the light. Dr. Ray, Vesper said finally. Full title. Full surname. A correction issued as a courtesy. Something flickered across Imogen Ray's face. Amusement, or an old bruise, or both. The exam itself was ordinary, which is to say, it was ordinary for everyone who wasn't wearing the paper gown. The gown was the same gown it is everywhere, cheap, loud, crackling like a grocery bag every time I breathed. The great democratic humiliation, proof that under everything, medicine still made no exceptions. I sat on the table and the paper crinkled and the fluorescent light above me hummed its one flat note. That B-flat drone every medical fixture in the world hums. And Vesper stood by the window with her back straight and her eyes on the monitor. And Dr. Ray worked and talked and watched. She watched too much. That was the second wrong thing. Not the watching itself doctors watch. It was the pattern. Her eyes went to me a beat too long, then to Vesper a beat too long, then back like she was taking a measurement between us. Like we were 2 points, and she was calculating the line. Blood work's excellent, she said. Vitals excellent. You take care of yourself, Miss Solano. Or a pause, and the late-arriving smile again, aimed just slightly past me. Someone does. The monitor beeped its small beeps. My pulse was on that screen, and I watched it climb, publicly, treacherously, 3 beats faster, because there was nothing I could do to stop a machine from saying what I wasn't saying. Vesper's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her jaw set. 2 minutes, she said to me, not to the doctor. An important distinction I noticed and then hated myself for noticing and stepped out into the hall. The door closed with a soft pneumatic hiss, and the room changed instantly, the way a stage changes when the play ends. Dr. Ray pulled off her gloves, one finger at a time, unhurried. She had the same relationship to time that Vesper had. Maybe that's where one of them learned it. She chose my clinic, she said, conversationally, to the gloves. Did you know that? There are 4 facilities in this city that could handle this contract. She chose mine. The gloves went into the bin. I've been trying to decide if that's a message or a punishment. With her, it's usually both. I started. The tea in your cupboard, she said. The meals that arrive before you're hungry. The way she knows your blood work before I've finished reading it to you. She looked at me then, fully, and her voice stayed light and her eyes did not. She was like this with me, too. The noticing. It feels like being the only person in the world, doesn't it? The paper gown crackled under my hands. I had gone very still. The way you go still when something with teeth walks into the clearing. Enjoy it while it's aimed at you, she said. That's not cruelty, Miss Solano. That's the only useful thing anyone will tell you all year. The fluorescent hummed. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang twice and stopped. I could smell the lemon over the bleach, and under my palms the paper had gone damp where I was gripping it. I should have said nothing. Silence was free and I had a contract full of reasons to use it. How long were you together? I asked. Imogen Ray didn't answer. She looked at the door Vesper had walked through. The door Vesper would walk back through in 90 seconds with her coat, and her silence, and her 11 steps. And the late smile came one more time, slower than ever. Together, she repeated, tasting the word. Ask her which part of that sentence she'd argue with. I couldn't sleep. I want to blame the bed. It would be easier to blame the bed, that enormous white acreage that made me feel like the last stamp on an envelope. But it wasn't the bed. It was a sentence, running laps. Ask her which part of that sentence she'd argue with. 3 weeks I'd been on that floor. 3 weeks of Miss Solano in the mornings and logged meals at noon and a gray sweater in a doorway some evenings, saying nothing that wasn't a directive, doing nothing that wasn't correct. 3 weeks of me lying in the dark doing exactly what I was doing now. Taking every small thing she'd done and turning it over, looking for the seam, deciding it meant nothing, deciding it meant everything, deciding I was a fool either way. At 2:11 in the morning I gave up and went for water. The hallway was dark and the marble found my socks immediately, that familiar shock of cold, and I moved the way you move in someone else's house at night like a rumor. 11 steps past her door, dark under it. Down the corridor, past Adrian's study, dark under that one too. But I could hear it, faintly, the specific dense silence of a room with a sleeping man in it and around the corner toward the kitchen, where there was light. Low light. One pendant over the island, dimmed to almost nothing, a small gold pool in all that dark, and in the pool of it, at the counter, in a robe the color of smoke, sat Vesper Lin. I stopped in the doorway. Every instinct I had said back away quietly, ghost quietly, before she looks up, because whatever this was, it wasn't scheduled, and everything with her was scheduled, and I understood without understanding that I had walked in on the 1 hour of the day that didn't belong to the calendar, but I didn't move, because of what was in her hands. The ultrasound printout, from that first appointment, that small, blurred, silver-black square, 10 weeks of almost nothing, static in the shape of a promise. She was holding it in both hands the way you hold something that could spill, and she was talking to it. Not talking, reading. There was a book open on the counter beside her, a children's book, I'd learn later, though from the doorway, all I could see was the shape of it, and her voice was moving through the dark so quietly it was barely more than breath, but it was her voice with everything removed. No control in it, no edges, no boardroom, no directives, no drawer sliding shut. The air smelled like cedar, the way it always did, and under it, something warmer, chamomile, honey, my tea. The yellow box was open on the counter beside her, and there was one steaming cup, and it wasn't hers, because hers, black coffee, no sugar, was already sitting there half-finished. 2 cups. One of them mine before I'd even entered the room. She had heard me coming. Of course she had heard me coming. She'd heard me coming from 11 steps away, and she had kept reading anyway. A page turned. The smallest sound in the world. In that kitchen, at that hour. It was thunder. Then she stopped, caught, mid-sentence. The way you catch yourself saying a name you're not allowed to say anymore, and she looked up, and for one unguarded second I saw her face before the mask arrived. I will spend the rest of my life trying to describe that second, and failing. It wasn't softness, exactly. It wasn't fear. It was the look of a woman found in the one room where she kept everything she'd removed from all the other rooms. Then the mask came, smooth, and she straightened, and she was Vesper Lin again. "You're awake," she said. I couldn't sleep. "I'm sorry, I gestured vaguely at the dark behind me, already retreating, already half a rumor again. "The water's there. The tea's yours." I came in because leaving would have made it larger. That's what I told myself. I crossed the cold floor and took the cup, and the counter's edge pressed sharp against my hip as I stood there. This one hard, true line in a room where everything else had gone soft and unreal, and I held onto that edge like a railing. She had turned the printout face down on the marble, casually, as if it were a document, as if I hadn't seen. "You read to it," I said. It came out before I could stop it. In the dark, apparently, I had no clauses. For a long moment she said nothing, and I watched her decide, actually watched it, the weighing, the storm considering where to land. She could freeze me out. She had a dozen ways, and I'd felt most of them, and every one of them would have worked. "There are studies," she said at last, "on auditory development." A pause. "The studies say the mother's voice." The words just sat there. The mother's voice. And she wasn't the mother I was the one carrying, and Adrian was the name on the contract, and she was, on paper, the furthest of the three of us from that silver-black square. And she had just told me, in the flattest voice in the world, at 2:14 in the morning, that she was reading to it anyway, that she'd decided the studies applied to her. That somewhere in that controlled and inventoried heart she had already claimed something no clause had given her. It wasn't a slip. It wasn't small talk. It was a confession, with the serial numbers filed off. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure the counter could feel it through my hip. I drank the tea to have something to do with my mouth. Chamomile and honey. My mother's brand. Her floor, her cedar, her 2 a.m., and my tea, waiting. I set the cup down. "I should let you—" I didn't finish. There was nothing true to put at the end of it. I pushed off the counter's edge and turned for the door, socks on frozen marble, 11 steps and a locked heart between me and the room where I could go back to pretending this was a job. I was at the door frame when she said it. "Stay." I stopped, one hand on the frame, the whole penthouse holding its breath around us. Mira, not Miss Solano, not the carrier, not the arrangement, not 3 weeks of correct and scheduled distance. Mira, at 2:14 in the morning, in the small gold light, with her coffee going cold beside a face-down photograph, and my heart heard it before the rest of me did. Stay. Mira. One word. One name. 11 steps from her husband's door. And I froze there, hand on the doorframe, heart going off like an alarm nobody could hear but me. Okay, my loves. I have to stop right there, because I need a glass of water. My own heart can't take this woman. Because what Mira does next, whether she turns around, what Vesper does with that photograph, and why, when Mira finally looks back, Vesper's hand is shaking, "Sweetheart, I cannot post that here. If I posted it here, you might never see my channel again. YouTube would take me away from you, and I'm not risking that. Not for anything. So the continuation is waiting for you on my Patreon link in the description below. It's already there. Warm. Waiting. Like tea in a cupboard. Thank you for staying with me tonight. For feeling every cold floor and every 2-second touch right alongside Mira. I felt you there the whole time. I always do. Subscribe if you haven't, so I don't lose you. Take care of yourselves for me. I'll see you in episode 2.